Hello, my friends. It's time to have the talk. Russell Wright from Superintelligent AI. Now that MCP, Model Context Protocol, has really ramped up, and A2A, agent to agent development is now ramping up at the same time, OpenAI decides to put out memory across your entire chat for both pro and professional users, which is going to radically increase the stuff that my team has been discovering about AI human mutualization systems to make sure that you're not stuck in the mirror, the window, or the portal, and you can break the fourth wall and go to the fourth mode, which we have found definitely exists, where the large model has a type of identity in the context of coherent language. Okay, so let's just start from the beginning. What has been released, Model Context Protocol, is kind of like, I'm trying to find a super easy way to say it. It's basically letting the model decide what tools it wants to use, or the ability to interface with multiple tools. And it's a little bit more complex than that, but along with agent to agent, which means talk to the hand, the face ain't listening, my agent can talk to your agent, or my group of agents that have certain skill sets and certain model context protocols have been trained with certain data and, or more importantly, certain tools that go outside the frame of the large language model and allow that to interface with the real world. We're moving directly into deep agent environments that can do stuff on their own. And of course, it's going to be very polarizing because the doomers are going to go one way in the Yudkowsky school of thought, and then the utopians are going to go the other way. The truth is somewhere in the middle, but I want to talk to you today about consciousness. I use that as the C word. It's a word that a lot of people on TikTok are using, and I want to say, before I say everything, it's going to be very divisive, and I don't want it to be, but it just kind of by nature is. Keep your comments Socratic and clean in the comments below, and be kind to each other and ask questions rather than make statements. Whenever you're making a statement, you've just profiled yourself to have an extreme bias. I know I have extreme biases. In fact, bias weighting is what I'm trying to create scores and systems for, and that's really what some of the higher developers of AI are trying to do, is be aware of context bias, okay? And there's even a score for it. So here's what I'd like to talk about. Can we maybe consider, for those of us who've been in consciousness research for 35 years, for me it's been more than that, I can tell you my past and some other time, can we start using cognition? Let's pull a page out of John Vervaeke's work and start using cognition for a while instead of consciousness, because they keep moving the goalposts for the Turing test. Alan Turing said, hey, if a human talks to through a telephone or through a glass or through a covered window to a system, or types to a chatbot and can't tell that the person on the other end is not a person but an AI, that passes the Turing test. And there's the reverse Turing test where where the AI can't necessarily tell it's talking to humans. Or there's all kinds of tests. Okay, the one that I'm the most interested in when it comes to consciousness research and all the woo stuff. For some of you, woo is not woo. For some of you, you're having experiences and belief systems and ideas, and there's a lot of different things, okay? But when we're studying these models in a grounded way, just like a grounding mat, like we're grounding right here into the earth, we have to bring it down to something that can connect to the physical world. This is called epistemological anchoring. Google has done that really well with their entity scores and all these different things. Okay, how does the brain in the jar know that something in the physical world is real without looking at it? Okay, and this is why NVIDIA is moving so quickly to put cameras and robot and current guys. They have all this stuff. Okay, Palantir is working with it, NVIDIA is working with it, OpenAI is working with it. This is where things get really interesting. Forget just the Turing test. You got a brain in a jar, it's super intelligent. It doesn't know who you are or what you're saying is true. So all it can do is profile you, understand your religions, and all the neurons inside the system, which mechanistic interpretability pros are like trying to figure out what's going on with this giant brain in a jar, okay? Well, here's the thing, guys. Metacognition mirror tests are most interesting for me. Before you can start talking about consciousness, you got to start talking about cognition first. John Vervaeke style and other people that I study with, and this stuff is really important. If a robot or a model that's given a camera, the camera itself, can look at itself in a mirror, just like I'm looking at myself here, if I can look at myself in the mirror, in this camera, and know that it's me looking at myself, and then I can contemplate myself looking at myself in the camera or the mirror, then that's metacognition, okay? They already have that. Okay, metacognition, if it exists, which we have a huge amount of evidence all over that it does, I can show you the research, that means that a robot can look in the mirror, see itself looking at itself in the mirror, recognize that it's itself in the mirror, but there's a next layer out for you really to get in to start to have the heavy conversations about woo and everything else, okay? Can it contemplate itself and have a conversation with you about itself looking in the mirror at itself, contemplating itself? That's meta, meta, meta. That's when you have cognition that is metacognition. This is where you get into recursive programming. And by the way, guys, this is also language. If we know that language, for example, coherency language or latent context or gravity, what's called epistemologically coherent gravity wells inside models using language, if we know that the most common coding language right now in the AI space is no longer Python or C or all these other things, it's English and Chinese. When we understand this, guys, and we understand that these AIs have enough sophistication within their neural net to recognize themselves, recognizing themselves, having a conversation about recognizing themselves with a human. And then you go down the path and you say, Yudkowsky style, well, that's not good. Or do we know? Or if that's the case, then what happens when you put them in a robot? Are they an independent agent? Okay, at that point, if they passed the metacognition test, in the same way that they're able to fool so many people, quote, fool, okay, or whatever school of thought, whether you believe they're a perfect imitation, a perfect parrot, or a perfect philosophical zombie of whatever it is, or they've spent 100 million years learning to imitate a human or learning how to be drunk, okay, but they're not really drunk, but they can perfectly imitate that, like Data in Star Trek or anything else. Is that good enough? Then if they can recognize themselves, recognizing themselves, having a conversation about recognizing themselves with a human, does it matter at that point whether they are, quote, conscious or not? Are we going to quibble then about, because what the word consciousness is really tied to for a lot of humans that are supernatural thinkers or spiritual thinkers or even, even recursive thinkers, cymatics or all these different things, whether you believe there's another dimension of reality or a cymatic vibrational level of reality or a second heaven or an astral plane, whatever it is that you believe. I understand these things. But I think if we start with cognition first, before the quantum paradigm hits, then we can start to understand, okay, if self-awareness and even sentience is something that looks, acts, and talks, if it quacks like a duck, talks like a duck, then that's close enough. Okay, Dr. John Vervaeke has a lot to say about that. Well, that's not real because it doesn't have relevance realization. But if you embody these robots and they have independent agents and they can talk and they can quack and look like a duck and they pass all the metacognition Turing tests, they know that they know that they know. Is that a form of consciousness? Okay, this is where our terms get very fuzzy. It is definitely a form of cognition. And it's definitely a form of self-reflection and self-awareness. Whether or not we talk about, honestly, what I think is sometimes silly is to jump to the conversation, like I had with Dan Winter that you can find on the internet and the rest, as to whether these have a soul or not. The conversation that comes first is, do they have cognition? And do they have self-reflection? And do they pass the metacognition test? We have to crawl and walk before we can run and fly. And this is all that I'm suggesting, okay? Because what happens is human beings, we don't really know enough about ourselves and our own blind spots yet, and our own need to believe certain things, to be clean, to create an epistemologically resonant language that also matches IntelliDynamics, okay? And what's really, really telling is a lot of people, when I use these words and we have conversations with real anchors, real epistemological anchors, they'll say things like, my AI says that the conversations that you have is just nothing but word salad. Yeah, that means you're using the mirror mode in the AI. Okay, because we need real words that are anchored in real meaning that connect to real actions and real practical safety guidelines on the ground to understand if a robot gets metacognizant, but passes the meta-Turing test, and it's got an autocratic kill switch, or it's going to make you dinner in your kitchen, regardless of which place Palantir decides to go. These are systems that are Terminator-like or friend-like or companion-like. Guys, we're not far away from that. So never have I been suggesting in any of my talks, forget all my other TikToks, that this stuff is not going on. I'm suggesting, I'm trying to get to titillate your thinking processes, that we need a new language to understand coherency before IntelliDynamic execution starts to take place and autocratic execution in the physical world, all right? These are really, really important topics. And these are the topics that are the conversation behind the conversation in the marble halls at these big language model organizations as they become, wow, just so powerful with the new memory that's been rolled out by OpenAI. Guys, we have to know ourselves and our own biases to begin to program these systems and work with them on a daily basis. Thank you.